Tactical Warfare offers a unique blend of old school and new age real-time strategy elements, with just enough base building to keep me playing it every time I get to test something new from its indie developers. This time around I have the third-person controllable mode for units to showcase to you, along with the more refined wave survival game mode, which is in fact available as a standalone game called Tactical Warfare Siege Survival. Link to its Steam store page and free demo is in the description below, as are links to my previous full showcases of this game and other similar new and upcoming RTS games. I am going to show you a mix of successful and failed survival runs with both of the available factions, but would love for you to also try this out and share your feedback with me and the developers. There are a number of improvements they have made since my last video, including adding a mini in-game cutscene and voiceover for each faction as you start your playthrough.
Commander, I'm not gonna sugarcoat how dire things are right now. Invaders from the planet Assarlion have left their own home after it was destroyed, and now they're trying to steal ours for themselves. You'll be taking control of an outpost to repel the Assarlion troops.
What you will notice straight away is that the building UI has been reworked and moved to the right side, and also that the power indicator has been improved to better reflect your current available power. Base building remains the same, with power stations, the investment center and the barracks as your first buildings, which then unlock more as they are completed. I personally love the building animations as they are finished and they give that perfect old school look even after building, as some have active components on them. I hope later most of them get these animations as well as the units. But that is my personal shopping list, so let's get on with the gameplay. The factory is the only building where you can order up more resource collectors, so that is a must once the investment center is completed. You can now already construct bunkers as your first defensive building, but interestingly enough, the devs have limited the range at which you can construct them to only close to your own already finished buildings. So you have to use your units to plug the holes in the terrain, which the enemy units will use to get to your resource collectors and base. You are given a few to start with, but the first enemy waves will already start to overwhelm these. The start with the other faction is similar to a point, but there are some important differences in units and buildings.
Planet Assarlion is no more. Out of sheer desperation, we have attempted to mass migrate to Earth. However, great tensions have pushed us to extreme measures, so now we must fight back. Send forth our troops, raise our defenses, and ensure that our race survives.
With the Assarlion's faction, you don't get any vehicles besides the unarmed flying transport, but the infantry units themselves have a really interesting feature you can use to your advantage. Because once you lay out your base and all the starting buildings, you can protect them locally with a beam gunner unit, which can deploy personal mini bunkers at the click of a button. You don't have to try and find the paths to your base the enemy can use like when you're playing with the Terran faction, but just surround your base with these mini bunkers, especially if you invest into recruiting more such infantry units from the barracks early on. So in my first playthrough with the Terrans, I forgot that there were two entrances to my base on the snow map, and I had enemy units attacking my base buildings very early on. But thanks to the fast Terran battlecrawler and its flamethrower, I was able to defend even against enemy light vehicles. The AI is designed to cripple your base, so you can expect to get hit where it hurts the most. The HQ, the investment center, resource collectors or power stations. All are primary targets for enemy units. Adding tanks to your starting arsenal will help greatly against these fast enemy light vehicles, even if they get to your buildings. On the other hand, when playing with the Assarlion faction, your line of one-man bunkers can hold the enemy at the doorstep, but you can upgrade the defensive line with laser raptors, the fixed turrets which deal damage to all land-based enemy units in a short range. The Blaze Guardian is the first light armor unit you can train from the factory in this faction and use as a fast response or interception force. It is also perfect for trying out the third-person vehicle mode, in which you can drive the Blaze Guardian yourself using the arrow keys and fire the cannon using your mouse. It is a fast and powerful vehicle and really fun to play with from this perspective. Just don't get too caught up in the action and forget to manage your base, as the enemy waves just keep increasing in difficulty. Here in my playthrough with the Terran faction, you can see me struggle with the placement of the turrets and bunkers because of the limited range next to your already constructed friendly buildings. The resource system is very simple currently, with unlimited supply in this game mode, letting you produce dozens of units just minutes into a playthrough. And that is for the best, as this minigame aims to teach you about base building, the use of different units, and the counterplay between the various weapon systems. But for those of you who are more of the turtle tactic fans, you can still put up a wide defensive ring around your base as long as you extend your base building a bit more to be able to cover the base entrance with fixed emplacements. And there are those that defend against enemy air units as well as those that target land-based units. Each faction also has a top-of-the-line, very expensive turret which has a huge range of fire, but you have to tack up a bit before being able to construct it. Our really useful tip is to also train some engineers, which still don't have the ability to capture any neutral buildings, but can repair your damaged ones instantly, which is much better than waiting for the maintenance tool to fix them, as that tool is rather slow at it. The radar station is a must-have building whichever faction you are playing with, but it is susceptible to loss of power, so you must make sure to have enough power stations built if you want to keep using the minimap which the radar station unlocks. Both factions have access to air and naval bases, and while some units that you can recruit from them are similar, others are not. But the main reason you will want to construct these is to recruit a large number of fast mobile helicopters and aircraft, which can deal with most enemy targets on land, air and sea without reloading their weapons. The enemy AI which sends waves at you actually has a chronic lack of anti-air units, meaning your own have almost unlimited value when defending. The action is fast in tactical warfare siege survival, and things keep heating up with larger and larger enemy waves, be they made up of land tanks and artillery, wings of bomber aircraft, or the occasional missile cruiser or two which come from multiple directions. It is so engrossing that you might even miss the not so obvious warning of an incoming nuclear attack. This is something I made sure to give my feedback on to the developers and requested the nuclear warning be more pronounced. I would also love to read your own feedback and comments about the gameplay. Of course, once you play a few games, something like this is hard to miss, but the proper way of onboarding new players to an RTS is not to drop an anvil on them while they're unprepared, as that leaves a bad aftertaste after a single playthrough and might end up with the player blaming the game for the loss, reducing the chances of a repeated attempt. On my second playthrough and with the Assarlion faction, I didn't let myself be surprised again by the nuke and watched for it when it would show up on the minimap. I also prepared a large force of aircraft to be able to fly there quickly and destroy the nuke launcher before the timer was up. This time I also ran into a bug, one that created a pathfinding issue for the resource collector vehicles, which would get stuck inside the investment center, and that would stop my income. It was possible to manually clear the problem, but it showed up again and again, and it is something the developers are already aware of and addressing. Despite the resource collector issue, I was doing well with the defenses, had an air group as well as a submarine group, but I was starting to lack power, as all the advanced buildings and especially the most powerful defensive turrets take a lot of it to keep operating. The lack of an option to upgrade power stations was beginning to become an issue on its own, so I hope the developers address this in future versions of the game. Especially as half of my base was getting covered in power stations at this point, and they are a target for enemy AI units. The super laser ship quickly became one of my favorite units, and I think it even shares the main weapon system with the top defensive turret design. But the effect looks a bit off when it fires for some reason, or maybe it's just me. Feel free to comment about it or any other unit you find interesting down in the comments below. Once you survive about 20 waves, the enemy AI starts sending its top guns at you, some in groups, some individually, like the huge slow-moving gunships or a mass of advanced tanks using high-yield energy weapons. This is when the old-school fog of war system, coupled with the alternative camera mode, starts to be very useful, as you can send out your air squadrons to intercept them or prepare more land units for defense on one side of the base. As I explained before, this minigame and gameplay mode is just one part of a much larger game you will find on the Steam store under the name Tactical Warfare, and I honestly think these developers have a good idea of where they're going with the gameplay. They take feedback, work on their game, change aspects players dislike, as evident by the change in the UI, and add interesting elements, such as the extra perspective camera mode, which does still need some balancing compared to the isometric camera. One thing that was yet to be fixed in the version I was playing was the automatic attack range of the Submarines, which would let enemy ships fire off missiles into my base despite anchoring themselves right next to my Submarines. But despite these rough spots, this is an RTS worth playing, and with all the planned additions and improvements, I think you will have a lot of fun in it. This playthrough was on borrowed time because of my income issues created by the stuck resource collectors, so I really wanted to get a win at this point and went back to the Terran faction for my fourth playthrough. Armed with all the knowledge, I plan to defend until the last wave and beat this minigame.
You can wipe them out, and hopefully we'll be able to commence our plans for a counterattack.
This time around, I decided to start with a barracks before an investment center, which I will put closer to the resource anomaly source, as well as to invest more into power right at the start. This will provide me with enough power for early defensive buildings and let me protect my base better than in my previous attempts. To prevent those deep dives the enemy units were making into my base and attacking my resource collectors, I now set up units at both entrances to the hilltop my base is sitting on. And since I choose to construct the barracks sooner this time around, I also start recruiting units as soon as possible to have more infantry for the first few enemy waves, which also come as infantry units. Knowing I can't build defensive turrets without main base buildings being close by the base entrance, I place power stations in that direction, so that once constructed they extend my build range. And by doing so, let me have range with future defensive turrets right at the gates to my hilltop. I'm going to mix both turrets and bunkers now, but for bunkers I need to recruit multiple units which will be shooting out of them. For a type of rocket infantry which isn't unlocked right at the start, I need to have a factory and a radar station constructed, as those are the tech prerequisites. It is so for most of the units in tactical warfare, and I always liked the system, because if you destroy all buildings of a certain type at your enemy's base, you basically break their tech chain and disable production of certain units. Along with rocket and regular infantry, I also move fast to recruit tanks in this playthrough, as enemy waves with heavy armor aren't far away, and tanks can also practically block paths into my base. Mobile AA vehicles are also on my recruitment list, as I know first helicopters and bomber aircraft come with those waves as well. One mistake I only later noticed in this playthrough was me not investing in extra resource harvesters. I totally forgot about recruiting more at the factory, and this seriously reduced the income I'm getting. I do figure it out once I see my bank account being drained with all the new unit recruitment, but it was another mistake that could have sunk my playthrough. So as easy as a wave survival mode might sound on paper, when you are actually playing it, there is always an opportunity to get something wrong and lose. In this case, I was getting ahead of myself with all the extra units and base buildings, and only now add extra resource harvesters. One more difference compared to my previous playthrough is my plan to invest into bomber aircraft. I wanted an extra air group to bomb the nuclear launcher with, as well as a way to attack multiple enemy missile ships at once. And speaking of the nuke launcher, I was keeping one eye on the minimap to see when the enemy nuke building would be revealed, so it wouldn't surprise me with the timer running down. The defensive turret buildings for both factions are the same in their use, if not the type of weapon system. One versus air, one versus land, and the big one. Terrans use missiles to down aircraft, while the Assarlions use lasers to do the same. I haven't tested them out against ships, so if you do, let me know how it goes down in the comments. With more tech buildings in place in this playthrough, I also recruited snipers, called hunters in tactical warfare, but I haven't really zoomed in enough to check their effectiveness against all armor enemy waves. Maybe I could have spent the money better elsewhere, but interestingly enough, these hunters can also target air units. By wave 10, I was getting attacked by long-range artillery in the form of rockets, which could damage my main base buildings from a position outside my defensive turret range, so I had to go down the hill with vehicles and deal with them quickly. This is basically what the big turrets are for, as well as a mobile strike air group, or I could have just used my own artillery, which I started to recruit more of. One more issue in the current version of the game I found while battling new enemy waves, which now included aircraft, was that my own mobile AA vehicles would go on their own, outside my defensive line and hunt down enemy aircraft. Once I even found them half the map away, and it is another thing the developers will have to address. In the Terran faction, to reach the most advanced units, you have to construct a pricey building named the Development Center. It is also a prerequisite for super weapons, which aren't available to you as the player in this game mode. But once you construct the development center, you gain access to long-range land artillery, which can be deployed at a click of a button, the huge turret, as well as the most advanced naval ships. This is right about the time I started to see that the bombers actually fired a sort of a missile that can track and hit moving targets. So while their damage wasn't all that great, at least they weren't dropping regular old bombs and missing enemy units on the move. What I was much more interested in is to see the huge defensive turret in action, especially because of its massive range. The Iron Behemoth is another artillery unit I had unlocked and wanted to try out, so I recruited a couple of those as well and planned to place them at the ridgeline along with my new big defensive turrets to rain down shells at approaching enemies. In other words, I was turtling like a king of the hill for all I was worth. And with 3 resource harvesters, I wasn't having any issues with the income. I basically wasn't even producing units fast enough to spend it all. The damage output of all those artillery shells was awesome, and no enemy tank or artillery unit could stand more than a second against my defense. The kick after firing that massive turret was very satisfying to see, and it is exactly the kind of animation I want to see on all the units. Of course, dealing with enemy waves is just one part of the survival game mode, so knowing full well I had to take out the enemy nuclear launcher, I was already investing into production of helicopter gunships to send at it. The helicopters were okay-ish as an anti-tank or anti-long-range art unit, but considering how little damage the bombers made to the enemy nuclear launcher, they were my best and fastest choice for dealing with it, especially as the turrets around the nuke were all constructed versus ground units. This might be something the developers already plan to change and make attacking it harder, but we will wait and see. By the time I got to wave 23, it was getting hot with huge land, air and naval attack mounted at my base. This time around, I had protected my base well enough to keep the income stream, recruit a mass of units, and constructed significant defenses. I was going to win. This also marked the last waves the enemy had, but for some strange reason I didn't get a victory screen after the 24th wave. Only as I was joyriding around the map and testing out the third-person mode with various units, did I come upon some enemy units stuck at their spawn points. Once I took them out, I won. For a work in progress, I would say this game has huge potential and hope you will enjoy it too. Thank you for watching and happy gaming.
I knew I could trust you, Commander. You showed the Assarlion troops that we're not going to take this lion down. Keep this up, and we might just get through this.